there, everyone. We're going to do a deep dive into the 2024 election today.
Okay.
I know a lot of you out there are looking for some insights into what exactly happened.
Sure.
We've got this really interesting piece here by Seth Abramson.
Okay.
Published on Substack, just days after the election?
Yeah, just a few days after.
Now, Abramson, he's a self-proclaimed Trump expert.
Right.
And he's kind of pushing back against this whole idea of a stolen election.
Interesting.
Which I think is really timely.
Yeah.
Especially given how charged things are right now.
For sure. Everybody's really on edge after this election.
Totally. Nobody knows what to think.
Exactly.
And, one of the first points that Abramson makes is it's just way too early to be making those stolen election claims.
Interesting.
He points out that millions of votes were still being counted when he wrote this piece, especially in California.
California.
And, California with its massive population and the huge volume of mail-in ballots that they have there.
Right.
It's notorious for taking longer to count those votes than other states.
It takes forever.
And it's not just California, right? There are always different types of ballots that come in after election night.
Oh, absolutely.
Like provisional ballots, overseas, military, absentee ballots, all of which need time to be processed and verified.
Yeah, and each one has its own process, too.
Exactly, so you can't just rush it.
Nope.
So all those early comparisons to the final tallies in 2020 that were going around online.
Oh, yeah, I saw a ton of those.
Especially among Trump supporters.
Right, of course.
They were kind of misleading.
For sure, because they didn't have the full picture.
Right. And Abramson's point is basically let's just wait for the full picture before we jump to conclusions.
Yeah, it's like trying to finish a puzzle when you're still missing half the pieces.
Exactly.
You're not going to see the full image.
And then he goes on, he suggests that instead of focusing on those really contested battleground states, we should be looking at Trump's performance in reliably red states.
Okay, interesting.
He argues that Trump's increased vote share in places like Texas and Florida points to a genuine enthusiasm for him.
So he's saying those results are harder to question.
Right. If there was some sort of widespread manipulation happening in those battleground states, wouldn't you expect to see similar discrepancies in those safe red states?
Right, where nobody would even bother to hack, quote unquote.
Oh, exactly.
It's kind of a counterintuitive argument.
Yeah.
But it definitely makes you think.
It really does.
Maybe we're looking at the wrong thing.
Maybe.
Maybe it's not about individual states, but more about a national trend.
That's what he seems to be suggesting.
And he even mentions Trump's increased vote share in traditionally blue states.
Oh, yeah.
Like New York and New Jersey.
That's right.
Which adds another layer to this whole idea.
It really does. It's okay, if this is happening everywhere, then what does that mean? Okay, now this next point, I know a lot of people were talking about this.
Okay, what's that?
This whole idea that rally size equals vote share.
Oh, yeah, I heard a lot of that.
Abramson actually calls it truly preposterous.
Wow, strong words.
I have to agree with him.
Rallies are exciting.
They are.
But they don't tell the whole story.
No. Remember how some people were using that logic in 2020?
Oh, yeah. They were like, look at the size of those crowds. Trump's definitely winning.
Right.
But it's just not that simple.
Not at all.
Rallies attract the most dedicated voters.
The diehards.
Yeah, maybe 5% of the electorate.
That's it.
Yeah, but those people are already voting for that candidate no matter what.
So it doesn't really tell you much.
Exactly. It doesn't reflect the views of that much larger group of voters.
Ones who actually decide the election.
The ones who might change their mind. The swing voters.
Right. And a great example of this is Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary.
Oh, yeah. He had massive rallies.
Huge crowds.
Tons of enthusiastic supporters.
But it didn't translate into a primary win.
Nope.
It just goes to show you can't equate cheering crowds with actual votes.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that we need to look beyond those surface-level indicators.
Yeah, and this actually connects to something else Abramson points out.
What's that?
The 2024 exit polls.
Interesting.
A lot of people were confused by those.
Yeah, I remember seeing a lot of discussion about that online.
Because they didn't seem to predict a Trump victory.
Right, but Abramson addresses that pretty directly.
He does?
He says that unlike those infamous exit polls from 2004, the 2024 exit polls were actually fairly consistent with a Trump win.
Okay.
They did show a lot of concern about the state of democracy.
Right, which is kind of what the Democrats were banking on.
Right.
But there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
Elon Musk had spent weeks spreading this idea that Democrats were a threat to democracy.
Oh, right, with his whole Twitter megaphone thing?
Exactly, and Abramson believes that whole misinformation campaign might have skewed those exit poll results.
That makes sense. People might have been genuinely anxious about democracy.
Right, but that doesn't automatically mean they were going to vote for Harris.
Exactly. It's more complicated than that.
It really raises a question about the impact of misinformation.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, were voters making decisions based on accurate information?
Right. Like, what were they seeing?
What were they hearing?
Who are they trusting?
That seems to be a recurring theme in Abramson's analysis.
It definitely is.
This idea that the information landscape is so distorted.
And it leads us to another point he makes.
Okay, I'm listening.
About the performance of Democrats in those down-ballot races.
Down ballot, you mean like...
For Congress?
Right.
Local offices.
The stuff that's further down on the ballot.
Exactly.
Okay.
Abramson highlights how Democrats performed better than expected in those races.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Potentially even winning back the House of Representatives.
Wow, I hadn't heard that.
And this is where his argument against a stolen election gets really interesting.
How so?
Like, if someone was manipulating the presidential race,
Yeah.
wouldn't they also target those congressional races?
Yeah, especially those key states.
Right, where the presidential results were so close.
Like Michigan, Wisconsin.
Nevada, Arizona.
Right, those were all nail-biters.
And, Democrats actually won some tough Senate races in those states.
That doesn't really fit with the whole hacking narrative.
It doesn't, does it?
It suggests that voters weren't just blindly following party lines,
Right.
but making more nuanced decisions.
Based on individual candidates and local issues?
It's like they were thinking for themselves.
Exactly, which brings us to this really intriguing and perhaps confusing trend from this election.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Ballot initiatives.
Ah, those are always interesting.
You know where voters decide directly on those specific policies or laws?
Right.
It seems contradictory that voters would support Democratic policies in those ballot measures.
Yeah.
While simultaneously voting for Trump.
It does. It's like, how do you reconcile those two things?
Right. How do you vote for policies that are diametrically opposed to the candidate you're supporting?
And Abramson argues that voters don't always connect the policies they support with the specific political party that advocates for them.
So they might be voting for something that benefits them.
Right.
Without realizing it's a Democrat thing.
Yeah, or maybe they don't fully understand the party platforms.
Like, they might not realize how closely aligned their beliefs are with the particular party.
Or maybe they vote for a policy they like.
Uh-huh.
And that makes it easier to justify their vote for the candidate they like.
Even if that candidate's party is against that policy.
It's like they compartmentalize those things.
It's like they're saying, well, I got what I wanted on this issue.
So I can vote for whoever I want for president.
Even if they would have opposed that policy.
Exactly. So, I don't know.
It's complicated.
It is. It's really fascinating, though, this insight into voter behavior.
Yeah, it shows how much more complex it is.
Than just red versus blue.
And it raises some crucial questions about political literacy.
Right, like, do people even understand what they're voting for?
And the effectiveness of those campaign messages.
Are they reaching the right people?
With the right information.
Big questions.
Huge question.
And we've covered a lot of ground already, but...
there's still more to unpack.
Let's do it.
What else does Abramson have to say about the evidence, or lack thereof,
Yeah.
for a stolen election?
Let's dive in. Well, he points out that historically there are certain hallmarks of a stolen election.
Okay.
Things like whistleblowers coming forward.
All right.
Election monitors reporting irregularities. Statistically improbable results.
Stuff that just doesn't add up.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle where the pieces just don't fit.
None of those things were present in 2024.
Right. Like, while there were recounts happening in some states at the time, there wasn't this, widespread evidence to support a nationwide hacking theory.
Okay, so it's not really adding up.
No, not really.
Okay, so we've talked about the evidence, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to look at, some of the psychological aspects of this election.
Right.
Like, how are people interpreting Trump's behavior both before and after those results came in?
Right.
Because Abramson spends a lot of time dissecting Trump's words and actions.
He does, especially those pre-election comments about not needing votes.
Right.
He sees that as a deliberate tactic,
Yeah.
not just typical Trump bluster.
Okay, so what was he really trying to do with those statements?
Abramson argues, and remember, he's a Trump biographer.
Right.
He studied this guy.
Yeah.
He argues that Trump was intentionally creating this narrative of preemptive victory. Almost like he was setting the stage to contest those results if he didn't win.
It's almost like he was planting those seeds of doubt early on.
Right.
So that if he lost, his supporters would be primed to believe that the election was rigged.
Precisely. And Abramson cautions us against analyzing Trump's words through like a conventional lens.
Right.
You know, we have to remember that his communication style is often, well, unconventional.
He's not exactly known for being subtle.
No, he's not.
Right. He's known for that doublespeak, for appealing to different audiences with the same message.
Right. Like he'll say one thing that appeals to his base.
Right.
But then there's this whole other layer of meaning that's targeted at like undecided voters.
And it can be really hard to decipher what he actually means.
You never know which audience he's really speaking to.
And that's why Abramson warns us against taking Trump's words at face value.
Yeah, like when he says things like, I don't need your votes.
Right.
He's playing a very specific game.
It's not just about boosting his own ego.
No, his base might hear it as a sign of strength and confidence.
Right.
But he's also sending a message to those undecided voters.
It's like a message of inevitability.
Right, like, I'm already winning, so why bother voting for the other guy?
It's a very calculated way of manipulating those perceptions.
It is. It's very strategic.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Trump's relative silence after the election.
Okay.
Because some people found that strange, even a little ominous.
Oh, yeah. I definitely saw some speculation about that.
What's Abramson's take on that?
Well, he doesn't think it's some sort of sinister strategy.
Okay.
He believes Trump is actually focused on building his administration for a second term.
So he's not plotting some coup in a dark corner somewhere?
No, not according to Abramson.
Okay.
He thinks Trump is obsessing over every cabinet appointment, every key position.
He's really thinking about who he wants in those roles.
He's trying to assemble a team that will execute his vision from day one.
So he's learning from what he sees as mistakes he made back in 2016.
Yeah, he felt like his first transition was rushed, chaotic,
So he's taking his time this time around.
being very methodical.
So he's basically holed up at Mar-a-Lago, poring over resumes, making those power plays.
That's Abramson's assessment.
And while he acknowledges that Trump's silence is concerning, it's not because of any election-related conspiracies.
No, it's more about Trump consolidating his power.
And laying the groundwork for his next 4 years in office.
Exactly.
Which, if we're being honest, is probably more worrying than any stolen election theory.
I think you're right about that.
It's the potential consequences of a second Trump administration that should really be keeping us up at night.
Absolutely. And this focus on those potential threats to democracy brings us to another crucial point that Abramson makes.
Okay.
He highlights that some of the loudest voices pushing this election denialism have a history of doing this after every election, no matter who wins.
So it's not just about Trump.
No, it's a pattern.
It makes you wonder what their real motivations are.
Right. Like, are they genuinely concerned about election integrity?
Or is it something else entirely?
Maybe it's just about sowing chaos.
And it highlights the need for us to be critical of our sources, to really evaluate that information before we accept it as truth.
Just because someone makes the most outrageous claims or has the loudest platform
Doesn't mean they're right.
It's about looking beyond the headlines.
Doing your own research.
And this connects to what I think is one of Abramson's most important and most human points.
Okay.
He acknowledges that very real grief that many Democrats are experiencing after this election.
He does. He writes with a lot of empathy.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that pain, that disappointment.
It's natural to want to hold on to hope.
Right.
To search for explanations that make that outcome more palatable.
To make sense of it all.
Right. But he urges us not to get stuck in that denial.
It's like he's saying, let's allow ourselves to grieve, but also remain open to new information as it emerges.
Because the truth, whatever it may be, will eventually come to light.
And Abramson suggests that in this case, the truth might be less about a stolen election and more about the effectiveness of the right's disinformation machine.
It's like they were playing a different game altogether.
And he reminds us that many voters went to the polls with very little accurate information.
About the candidates or the issues.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. It really raises the question of how we, as informed citizens, can better navigate this increasingly complex information landscape.
Right. Like, if the problem isn't necessarily a stolen election, but rather the effectiveness of misinformation,
then what can we do?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. How do we ensure that our decisions, both personal and political,
Right.
are based on accurate and reliable information.
And how do we combat the spread of misinformation without falling into that trap of censorship or silencing dissenting voices?
It's such a delicate balance.
And it feels increasingly difficult to achieve in our current political climate.
I agree. It's a challenge we all face.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from Abramson's piece.
What's that?
It's a call to action.
Okay.
A reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting the integrity of our elections and the health of our democracy.
It's not just about voting.
No.
It's about being informed
Joe Gates.
and holding our leaders accountable.
I think one of the most important questions we can ask now is, like, where do we go from here?
It's easy to get caught up in all the emotions after an election like this.
Yeah, totally.
But Abramson, he challenges us to kind of channel that energy into something constructive.
So he's not just doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
He's actually offering solutions.
He is. He offers some really concrete recommendations.
Okay, like what?
Well, what's interesting is they're all centered around this idea of reclaiming agency,
Okay.
taking action, instead of just like stewing in our feelings.
So it's not about being passive.
No, it's about being proactive.
Okay, I like that.
And his first suggestion is for Democrats to really focus on what they can control.
Okay, because there's a lot they can't control right now.
Exactly, like Trump's back in the White House.
There's not much they can do about that.
But he reminds us that even with that reality, there are still avenues for progress at the state and local levels.
So it's about shifting our focus, our efforts.
To areas where we can make a tangible difference.
I see. So instead of getting bogged down in national politics,
Right.
focus on what's happening in your own backyard.
Exactly. He talks about the importance of grassroots organizing, supporting progressive candidates in those down-ballot races.
Right. Those are so important.
They are. And advocating for policy changes at the community level.
So it's about building power from the ground up.
Exactly.
Not waiting for someone else to come and save us,
Right.
but taking matters into our own hands.
And that reminds me of something else Abramson emphasizes.
What's that?
Education.
Ah, yeah.
He's very passionate about the need to combat misinformation with accurate and reliable information.
It's not just about winning elections.
No.
It's about winning hearts and minds.
It's about changing the way people think.
So how do we do that?
Well, he talks about engaging in those difficult conversations.
Oh, yeah. Those are never fun.
No, but they're necessary.
Challenging those false narratives with facts and evidence.
And being patient.
Because it's not always easy, is it?
Not at all. Especially in our current political climate.
Where everything feels so divided.
It's like we're speaking different languages.
Yeah, and I think it starts with listening.
Oh, absolutely.
Truly hearing what the other side has to say.
Even if we don't agree with it.
It's about trying to understand where they're coming from.
Right, and cultivating empathy.
Even if their experiences and perspectives are vastly different from our own.
Because at the end of the day, we are all in this together.
We are, and that's the message I think Abramson is trying to convey.
Yeah.
Yes, this election was a setback for many.
It was a tough one.
But it's not the end of the story.
There's still hope.
There's still work to be done.
And it starts with each of us.
With our willingness to engage, to learn, to fight for those values we believe in.
So I think as we wrap up this deep dive into Seth Abramson's analysis,
Yeah.
he leaves us with a really powerful question.
What's that?
How can we, in our own lives, in our own communities, contribute to building a more informed, more engaged, more compassionate society?
It's a question worth reflecting on.
It is. And I hope it inspires you, the listener, to take action.
To make a difference.
No matter how small it may seem.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember to stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
The future of our democracy truly depends on it.